There are nights that create headlines, and then there are nights that create legends. June 15th, 1957 was supposed to be just another glamorous Hollywood party, a room filled with movie stars, producers, and powerful people pretending not to be impressed by one another. Instead, it became the night two of the most famous people on Earth accidentally revealed who they really were. Because before the evening was over, Audrey Hepburn would walk across a crowded mansion and make a request so unexpected that it would leave Elvis Presley speechless. Minutes later, the entire room would be watching, laughing, cheering, and witnessing something far more valuable than celebrity. They were about to witness vulnerability, the kind fame can never buy, the kind almost nobody ever gets to see. And it all began with a simple walk across a room. The Beverly Hills mansion of producer Hal Wallace glowed like a palace beneath the California night sky. Golden light spilled from enormous windows. Expensive cars lined the streets outside. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected thousands of tiny stars across polished marble floors. Power lived here. Success lived here. Hollywood itself seemed to breathe within those walls. The biggest names in entertainment filled every corner of the estate. Near the bar, Frank Sinatra held court effortlessly. People leaned toward him whenever he spoke, hanging on every word. On the terrace, Cary Grant was telling stories that caused waves of laughter to ripple through the crowd. By the swimming pool, Grace Kelly radiated the elegance that would soon make her royalty in more ways than one. Everywhere stood icons, living legends, people whose faces covered magazines around the world. Yet despite all that fame gathered beneath one roof, attention kept drifting toward two people. One represented old Hollywood elegance. The other represented a cultural earthquake. Audrey Hepburn, Elvis Presley. They couldn't have been more different. And perhaps that was exactly why fate decided to place them in the same room. Audrey moved through the party like moonlight. Nothing about her demanded attention, yet attention followed her everywhere. At 28 years old, she had become the definition of grace. Her Oscar-winning performances had transformed her into one of the most admired women on the planet. Yet what struck people wasn't merely her beauty. It was something harder to describe, a quiet kindness, a softness that somehow survived inside one of the most competitive industries in the world. Tonight, she wore a simple black dress, nothing extravagant, nothing designed to shock, and somehow she looked more unforgettable than every diamond necklace in the room. Across the mansion stood Elvis Presley, only 22, yet already carrying the weight of global fame. Women screamed his name. Teenagers copied everything he did. Parents blamed him for corrupting an entire generation. Newspapers couldn't stop writing about him. America couldn't stop talking about him. Yet, at that moment, standing beside a set of French doors with a Coca-Cola in his hand, Elvis looked strangely alone. The smile on his face fooled most people, but not all. Because beneath the confident image lived a young man fighting doubts nobody saw. Hollywood made him nervous. It always had. Music was different. On stage, he understood who he was. He understood the energy, the rhythm, the connection. But Hollywood? Hollywood felt like entering someone else's house and trying not to break anything. Every actor in the room seemed polished, trained, refined. Many had spent decades mastering their craft. Meanwhile, Elvis still questioned himself daily. Was he truly becoming an actor? Or was he simply a singer, pretending to be one? The question haunted him more than interviews ever revealed. Every film set felt like an examination. Every review felt like a verdict. Every Hollywood gathering reminded him of how far he had traveled from Tupelo, Mississippi, and how far he still felt from belonging. He took another sip from his glass. Then something happened. A movement caught his eye. At first he barely noticed. Then his heart skipped. Audrey Hepburn, walking directly toward him, not toward someone beside him, not toward a producer standing nearby, toward him. His pulse immediately accelerated. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, the room suddenly felt smaller, louder, warmer. He had watched Roman Holiday more times than he admitted publicly. 3 times at least, maybe 4. What fascinated him wasn't simply her beauty. Hollywood was full of beautiful people. It was her honesty. When Audrey appeared on screen, she didn't seem to act. She seemed to exist. A glance from her could carry heartbreak. A smile could light an entire scene. A tiny shift in expression could communicate more than pages of dialogue. Elvis admired that deeply. Because authenticity was the thing he valued most. In music, in life, in people. And Audrey Hepburn seemed more authentic than anyone in Hollywood. Now she was approaching him, each step effortless, natural. The crowd unconsciously opened around her. People moved aside without realizing they were doing it, like water parting around a boat. Elvis suddenly became aware of everything. His posture, his hands, his hair, his voice. He felt ridiculous, like a nervous teenager. Then she stopped directly in front of him and smiled. For a brief moment, Elvis understood something cameras never fully captured. Her smile wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real, warm, human. The kind of smile that made you feel seen. Mr. Presley. Her voice was soft, elegant, yet playful. I've been hoping to meet you all evening. The words hit him harder than she could possibly know. Millions admired Elvis. But admiration from Audrey Hepburn felt different, because respect from someone you respect carries a different weight. For a split second, he forgot every clever response he had ever used. All of them disappeared. Yes, ma'am, he finally managed. I'm honored. Audrey laughed softly, not at him, with genuine warmth. I should be saying that to you. The conversation should have ended there. Most celebrity encounters did. Polite words, polite smiles, then everyone moved on. But Audrey hadn't crossed the room for small talk. She had a mission. And what happened next would change the entire atmosphere of the evening. She glanced around carefully, almost as if she didn't want anyone else hearing. Then she leaned closer. I need your help. Elvis blinked. My help? Audrey nodded. A playful sparkle appeared in her eyes. I'm preparing for a film. He listened, carefully. There is a scene where my character must dance to rock and roll music. Elvis smiled. That seems straightforward enough. Then she continued. The problem is... She paused, and suddenly looked almost embarrassed. I have absolutely no idea how to dance to rock and roll. Elvis stared. For a second, he genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. My director wants authenticity, she explained. "And unfortunately, I was trained in ballet." Ballet. The word instantly explained everything. The elegance, the precision, the effortless control, the way she moved. Suddenly, it all made sense. Then Audrey asked the question nobody, including Elvis, saw coming. "So I was wondering," a mischievous smile appeared, "if you would teach me." Elvis smiled. "Someday?" Audrey shook her head. "No." Then she pointed at the floor beneath them. "Right now." For 1 second, silence. Elvis simply stared. The biggest actress in Hollywood wanted a rock and roll lesson. Here, in front of everyone, at a party filled with the most famous people in America. His surprise exploded into laughter. Not mocking laughter. Pure delight. The kind that arrives when life suddenly becomes wonderfully unpredictable. "You want me to teach Audrey Hepburn how to dance?" "Is that such a ridiculous idea?" she asked. The sparkle in her eyes grew brighter. Elvis shook his head. "No, ma'am." Then another thought entered his mind. A dangerous thought. A funny thought. One that escaped before he could stop it. "Tell you what." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "What?" Elvis grinned. "If I teach you rock and roll," he pointed toward her, "you teach me ballet." For a fraction of a second, Audrey froze. Then she burst into laughter. Real laughter. Beautiful laughter. The kind impossible to fake. Several nearby guests turned immediately, curious, interested, wanting to know what was happening. Audrey extended her hand, her eyes sparkling, her smile wider than ever. And with those next words, she unknowingly set the stage for one of the most unforgettable moments anyone at that party would ever witness. "Mr. Presley," she offered her hand, "you have yourself a deal." And neither of them had the slightest idea that within minutes, half of Hollywood would be gathered around them, watching, laughing, and seeing two legends become something far more interesting than legends. Human. The moment Audrey Hepburn accepted Elvis Presley's challenge, something changed inside the room. At first, only a handful of people noticed. A few curious glances, a few smiles, nothing unusual. Then someone whispered Audrey Hepburn's name. Someone else mentioned Elvis, and suddenly, curiosity spread through the party like a spark racing across dry grass. Heads began turning. Conversations slowed. People abandoned drinks halfway to their lips. Within moments, a growing circle had formed around them. Nobody wanted to miss whatever was about to happen. Because when the biggest movie star in Hollywood and the biggest music star on Earth stood face to face in the middle of a Beverly Hills mansion, something interesting was bound to happen. The question was, how interesting? Elvis suddenly became aware of dozens of eyes watching him. His confidence immediately dropped. Performing for thousands of screaming fans was easy. This was different. Far different. On stage, he knew exactly who he was. Here, he felt like a schoolboy standing in front of a classroom. Audrey, meanwhile, looked completely calm, almost too calm, which made Elvis suspicious. "You've done this before," he said. Audrey blinked innocently. "Done what?" "Made people embarrass themselves." Her laughter came instantly, and the growing crowd laughed with her. The ice was broken, but the real show hadn't even started. Someone near the record player shouted, "Let's see the king teach!" More laughter followed. Then another voice called out, "Give us some rock and roll!" The room erupted in agreement. Suddenly, the pressure was real. Very real. Elvis glanced around. Frank Sinatra was watching. Cary Grant was watching. Grace Kelly was watching. Half of Hollywood was watching. And every second that passed made the anticipation worse. Then the music started. The opening rhythm echoed through the mansion. A familiar rhythm, one of Elvis's own songs.
The crowd cheered immediately. Elvis groaned. "Oh, that's not fair." Audrey tilted her head. "What?" "It's hard enough teaching somebody to dance." He pointed toward the speakers. "Now I have to do it to my own music." The crowd laughed again, but Audrey's smile softened. For a brief second, she noticed something few others did. Beneath the humor, he was nervous. Not stage nervous, something deeper. Human nervous. And suddenly she respected him even more. Because despite everything people believed about Elvis Presley, despite the fame, the headlines, the screaming fans, he wasn't pretending to be fearless. He was simply moving forward while nervous. There was courage in that. Real courage. "All right," Elvis said, taking a deep breath. "Rock and roll isn't really about steps." Audrey folded her arms, listening carefully. "It's about feeling." The actress smiled. "That sounds wonderfully vague." The crowd chuckled. "I'm serious." "I know." "Then trust me." Audrey raised one eyebrow. "That's usually what people say right before something goes wrong." Even Elvis laughed. The chemistry between them was becoming impossible to ignore. Not romantic, not performative, something rarer. Two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. Two people who had completely forgotten they were supposed to be legends. "Okay," Elvis continued. "Just listen to the music." The rhythm filled the room, strong, alive, electric. Elvis began moving. Nothing exaggerated, nothing like his concerts, just enough to demonstrate. His shoulders loosened, his body found the beat naturally, effortlessly, as though music flowed through his veins. Audrey watched carefully. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying every movement, analyzing, calculating, learning. Exactly the way a great actress learned a role, exactly the way a ballet dancer learned choreography. Then she tried to copy him, and immediately everything fell apart. The room exploded with laughter. Not cruel laughter, joyful laughter. Because Audrey Hepburn looked absolutely adorable. Years of classical ballet training had programmed her body for precision. Rock and roll demanded freedom. Ballet demanded control. Rock and roll demanded surrender. The two styles collided inside her like opposing forces. The result was fascinating and hilarious. Her movements were too careful, too measured, too elegant. She looked like a queen trying to imitate a teenager. Even Audrey couldn't stop laughing. "Am I that bad?" "No," Elvis smiled, then paused. "Actually." The crowd leaned forward. "Yes." The room erupted. Audrey covered her face, laughing harder. For perhaps the first time all evening, she wasn't Audrey Hepburn, the actress. She was simply Audrey, a woman trying something difficult and failing spectacularly. Yet instead of protecting her image, she embraced it.
That alone impressed Elvis. Most celebrities spent their lives hiding imperfections. Audrey wasn't hiding. She was enjoying them. "Again," Elvis said. She nodded, determined. The music continued. This time Elvis stepped closer. Not enough to make headlines, just enough to guide. "You're thinking too much." "I always think." "That's the problem." The crowd laughed. Audrey pointed accusingly. "You sound exactly like my directors." "They're probably right." "That isn't helping." "It wasn't supposed to." Another wave of laughter. The atmosphere had completely transformed. Nobody cared about status anymore. Nobody cared about fame. Everyone was invested in something much more entertaining. Watching two icons become ordinary people. Elvis gently tapped the beat with his hand. "Feel that?" Audrey nodded. "Good. Now what?" "Stop trying to dance." She stared at him. "What?" "Stop trying." "That makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense." "It absolutely doesn't." The crowd laughed again. Even Frank Sinatra was smiling, watching closely. Because beneath the comedy, something unusual was happening. A lesson bigger than dancing. Elvis wasn't teaching movements. He was teaching freedom. The same freedom that had transformed American music. The same freedom that terrified critics. The same freedom audiences loved. Finally, Audrey exhaled, relaxed, and stopped trying to be perfect. The difference was immediate. Her body loosened, her smile widened. Her movements became less calculated, more natural, more alive. And suddenly, something clicked. The crowd noticed instantly. "There," Elvis pointed. "That's it." Audrey laughed. "That?" "Yes." "That looked ridiculous." "Exactly." The room exploded because Elvis was right. Rock and roll wasn't about looking perfect. It was about feeling alive. For the next several minutes they danced, and with every passing second the crowd grew larger. People appeared from every corner of the mansion, drawn by laughter, drawn by curiosity, drawn by something they couldn't quite explain. The energy became contagious. Even people who had arrived intending to impress others were now standing shoulder to shoulder, grinning like children. The song finally ended. Applause erupted instantly, loud, sincere, thunderous. Audrey took a playful bow. The crowd cheered even louder. Elvis applauded her performance. She applauded his teaching. Then Audrey slowly turned toward him, and Elvis immediately recognized the look in her eyes. Mischief. Dangerous mischief. The kind that usually led to trouble. "Oh no," Elvis muttered. The crowd laughed before she even spoke, because everyone knew exactly what was coming. Audrey folded her arms, smiling. "My turn." The room erupted. People cheered immediately. They had almost forgotten the deal, the bargain, the trap. And now it was time for Elvis Presley to honor his side of the agreement. His confident smile disappeared. "Now hold on." More laughter. "I seem to remember making that deal under emotional pressure." The crowd roared. Audrey shook her head. "A deal is a deal." Someone shouted from the audience, "Give us ballet, Elvis!" Another voice followed, "Show us the pirouette!" The entire room burst into laughter. Elvis looked around. There would be no escape, no rescue, no miracle. Half of Hollywood wanted to see the king of rock and roll attempt ballet. And half of Hollywood was about to get exactly what it wanted. Audrey stepped forward, a smile dancing across her face. Then she extended her hand toward him. "Ready, Mr. Presley?" Elvis stared at her hand, then at the crowd, then back at Audrey. And for the first time all evening, true fear appeared on his face. Because teaching Audrey to dance had been easy. Learning ballet from Audrey Hepburn? That was going to be a disaster. And everyone in the room knew it.
For a moment, Elvis Presley seriously considered running. Not from a stage, not from a crowd, not from screaming fans. From ballet. The realization alone was enough to make him laugh. Half of Hollywood stood around him in a widening circle. Some held drinks, some leaned against walls. Some sat on furniture that had suddenly become front-row seats to what was quickly turning into the most entertaining event of the evening. And every single one of them was waiting. Waiting to watch the king of rock and roll attempt something he had absolutely no chance of mastering. Audrey Hepburn extended her hand again. Her smile was impossible to resist. "Ready?" Elvis sighed dramatically. "No." The room exploded with laughter. "Excellent," Audrey replied. "That's exactly how I felt 5 minutes ago." The crowd loved it, because she was right. Moments earlier, she had stepped completely outside her comfort zone. Now it was his turn, and there would be no escape. Someone switched the music. The powerful rhythm of rock and roll disappeared. In its place came the elegant sound of a classical orchestra. The entire atmosphere shifted instantly. The room seemed quieter, more formal, almost sacred. Audrey stepped into the center of the floor. Every movement she made looked effortless, natural, as though gravity somehow affected her less than everyone else. She turned toward Elvis. "First position." Elvis stared. "That sounds simple." "It isn't." The crowd laughed. Then Audrey demonstrated. Her feet moved into position. Perfect posture, perfect balance, perfect control. It looked easy, dangerously easy. The kind of easy that hides years of suffering behind a single graceful movement. "Now you." Elvis looked down at his own feet, then at hers, then back down again. "Something tells me this is where things go wrong." He attempted to copy her immediately. Everything went wrong. The room erupted. His feet pointed in different directions. His balance vanished.
His posture looked like a man trying to survive an earthquake. Even Elvis couldn't stop laughing.
"Oh, this is bad."
"No," Audrey said. Then she paused. "It's worse." Another explosion of laughter. Even Frank Sinatra nearly spilled his drink. Audrey moved closer, patient, encouraging, never mocking. She adjusted his stance slightly. "No, from the hips."
"The hips?"
"Yes."
"My hips have spent years doing the opposite of this."
The crowd roared. The irony was impossible to ignore. The very hips that had shocked America now seemed completely incapable of performing basic ballet. Elvis tried again. A little better. Still terrible, but better. "Good," Audrey said. The word surprised him.
"Really?"
"No." The room nearly collapsed with laughter. For the next several minutes, Hollywood witnessed something unforgettable. Audrey Hepburn patiently teaching ballet, Elvis Presley repeatedly losing battles against his own body. Every lesson created a new disaster. Every correction produced another mistake. Every attempt generated more laughter. Yet something strange began happening. The laughter wasn't directed at him. It surrounded him, supported him, celebrated him. Because everyone could see what mattered. He wasn't protecting his image. He wasn't trying to look cool. He wasn't hiding behind fame. He was trying, failing, and trying again. The same thing Audrey had done. The same thing most adults eventually stop doing. And somehow that made him more impressive than any perfect performance ever could. "All right," Audrey said. "Let's attempt a plie." Elvis narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "That sounds painful." "It isn't." "That's exactly what a painful thing would say." The crowd burst out laughing again. Audrey demonstrated. A smooth bend, graceful, controlled, beautiful. Elvis copied her, or at least attempted to. Halfway through, his balance vanished. He stumbled sideways. The room gasped. For one terrifying second, it looked as though Elvis Presley might accidentally destroy a priceless antique table. He caught himself at the last moment. The crowd erupted into applause. "Thank you," Elvis said, bowing dramatically. "I'd like to thank my reflexes." Even Audrey doubled over laughing. Tears had begun forming in the corners of her eyes, not because he was failing, because she was having fun. Real fun. The kind fame rarely allows. The kind success often steals. The kind both of them had probably missed more than they realized. Then Audrey decided to make things even harder. "Now," she said, "we attempt a turn." Elvis immediately shook his head. "No." "Yes, no, yes, absolutely not." The crowd chanted immediately, "Yes, yes, yes!" Elvis looked around helplessly. There was no escape. Again. He positioned himself, took a breath, prepared for disaster. And disaster arrived exactly on schedule. The turn lasted less than a second. His balance disappeared instantly. His feet tangled, his arms flailed, and he nearly fell flat on the floor. The crowd exploded. Some people laughed so hard they could barely breathe. Cary Grant wiped tears from his eyes. Frank Sinatra leaned against a wall for support. Even producers known for their seriousness looked years younger. Because they weren't watching stars anymore. They were watching humanity. And humanity was beautiful. Eventually, Audrey called an end to the lesson. Partly because the dance lesson was over. Mostly because Elvis had become a genuine threat to nearby furniture. The applause that followed felt different. Longer, warmer, more meaningful. Not applause for talent. Applause for courage, for humility, for joy. As the crowd slowly drifted back toward conversations, something remarkable happened. Neither Elvis nor Audrey immediately left. Instead, they found themselves standing near the terrace doors overlooking the dark California night. The noise of the party faded into the background. For the first time all evening, they were alone. Or as alone as two global superstars could ever be. A soft breeze moved through the open doors. Audrey looked out toward the lights of Beverly Hills. Then she said something unexpected. "When I walked over tonight," she hesitated, "I was nervous." Elvis turned, genuinely surprised. "You?" Audrey smiled.
Of course. Why? She looked at him. You're Elvis Presley. The answer stunned him, not because of the compliment, because of the sincerity. For years, people had assumed confidence came naturally to famous people. It didn't. Fame magnified insecurities. It didn't erase them. Audrey understood that, because she lived it too. I thought you'd think my question was ridiculous, she admitted. Elvis laughed softly. And I thought you'd think I didn't belong here. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Audrey nodded, because she understood exactly what he meant. The pressure, the expectations, the constant feeling that everyone expected perfection. She knew that burden, perhaps better than most. We spend so much time pretending we know what we're doing, she said quietly. Sometimes we forget we're allowed to learn. The words settled between them. Simple, yet powerful. Elvis looked toward the party, the famous faces, the expensive suits, the polished smiles. Then back at Audrey. You know what I like most about tonight? What? For a few minutes, he smiled. We weren't Elvis Presley and Audrey Hepburn. She smiled back. No. We were just two people, being terrible at something. Audrey laughed. And enjoying it. Exactly. The silence that followed felt comfortable, rare, honest. The kind of silence that only exists between people who understand something important about each other. Then Audrey extended her hand, not as a movie star, not as a celebrity, simply as a friend. Thank you. Elvis took her hand, then, with exaggerated formality, bowed dramatically over it. The gesture made her laugh again, and that laughter would become one of the memories he carried for years. They never made a film together, despite endless rumors, despite endless speculation. Life simply carried them in different directions. But they stayed in touch. Occasional letters, short notes, words of encouragement, small reminders of a night neither forgot. When Audrey later saw Elvis taking more serious acting roles, she sent messages supporting him. When Elvis watched one of Audrey's later performances, he admired the same honesty that had impressed him from the beginning. The friendship never became constant. It didn't need to. Some connections don't require daily conversations. Some moments are powerful enough to last a lifetime. Years later, when interviewers asked Audrey Hepburn about memorable Hollywood experiences, she would occasionally remember that night. Not because Elvis was famous, not because the room was filled with stars, but because he had been kind. Genuinely kind. He was willing to laugh at himself, she would say, and that's rarer than talent. Elvis told the story too, usually while demonstrating the ballet positions he still couldn't perform correctly. His friends would laugh, audiences would laugh, but beneath the humor lived something deeper, a lesson, a truth, a memory. Because that night taught him something fame never could. Greatness isn't about being the best at everything. It's about respecting what others do. It's about being brave enough to fail, being humble enough to learn, and being secure enough to look foolish. The guests who attended that party remembered the laughter, the dancing, the chaos, but most of all, they remembered what happened beneath it all. For one evening, two of the most famous people in the world stopped trying to be extraordinary. And in doing so, they became unforgettable. Because perfection impresses people,
but humanity touches them. And on a warm Hollywood night in 2007, Elvis Presley and Audrey Hepburn reminded everyone in that room of something that still matters today. The strongest people are not the ones who never fail. They're the ones willing to smile while learning. The wisest people are not the ones who know everything. They're the ones willing to be beginners again. And sometimes, the most beautiful dance isn't the one you perform perfectly. It's the one you're brave enough to attempt when you know you'll probably fall.